Hi, Patty. Hi, Ellen.
I see some friends out there, some Mango publishing friends.
Good
Hi,
to
Mr.
see
B.
everyone.
Hey,
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. Hi.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi, Bill. Hey, Shadeen. Lewis and Elian. So good to see you coming on.
Look at all these faces and names. This is great.
Hi, Kim.
Nita.
Hi, Pat. Hi, Nita.
Ed.
Hello, Marlena.
Darcy. Hi, Glenn. So nice of you to get on.
Can you see me, Marlena? This is Pat.
I can see you.
Oh,
Hi,
okay,
Pat.
good. I'm glad it worked. A miracle.
Congratulations. Oh, hello. It's so nice to see you.
It's been many years.
It's been many years. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. You're the first to welcome me into NYU. I remember.
Oh, that's true. I've forgotten that.
We've got page 2 now. So
hi, Bill and Joan.
Thank you.
I'm going to, where is Marlena?
Right in the top center.
Yeah.
Top center, top center.
Yeah.
I'm going to my computer to log on.
all right, we'll have one more name on here then. Well,
Lisa,
she's doing that.
hi.
I will. Oh, go ahead. I'll introduce myself in the store. My name's Michael. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we are located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village. And I'm going to admit someone else here. The store has been around for 42 years, and we are still plugging along, despite everything that's going on right now. But we are closed to browsing. So if you want to visit the store, you have to, you can do so online at annieblooms.com. We also have curbside pickup if you place an order by the phone or email or online. And we've got people in the store, not myself, but others. We're there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day to answer phones and reply to emails. They love to hear from people who are looking for book recommendations. That's one of the best things about being a bookseller, and we really miss that a lot. Links Nelson. So yeah, please get in touch with them and ask for book recommendations. And if it's the middle of the night, you can shop at annieblooms.com and come and pick up your books, or we do local delivery within 3 miles of the store. We also have various shipping options. This is the last event of our 2020 event season. So yay, going out on a good note here. And admitting one more person. We are still having Portland Book Festival is still going on, and we are one of the official booksellers. So I just wanted to let you know about that. It's going through the November 21st. We're the booksellers for one of the virtual stages. It's all online, mostly during the day. I'll tell you about a few of the really cool events that are coming up on tomorrow from 2 p.m. to 2:45. Claire Massoud, Lydia Millett, and Alexander Chi are going to be doing an event. Lydia Millett's new novel is a children's Bible. You might have read about that one. Claire Massoud is the author of Kant's Little Prussian Head and Other Reasons Why I Write, which is just such a great title. On Monday, November 16th at 3:30, Charles Yu and Emily Nemens, moderated by Portland author John Raymond. It's going to should be a really great event. I read Emily's novel about baseball, it was really good. Alexis Coe and Veronica Chambers, Making History is their event. That's on Thursday, the 19th at 12:30. And they're all listed on our website. You can check those out and register. Should be some good stuff there. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Marlena Fiol and Cheryl Baker. And we're admitting one more person to the room. We have both of their books on our shelves right now, so you can go to the website and pick those up. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now before I forget. There you go. You can click that anytime and go and pick up both of those books. Even if you have copies for yourself already, they make great holiday gifts. We do free gift wrapping at the store, so pick up copies. There's going to be reading and conversation between the two authors, and then a Q&A session after that. You can feel free to put questions in the chat, or we can open it up later for questions from the audience, however you prefer, whatever you feel most comfortable with. So yeah, let's get to it. Celebrated scholar, speaker, and author Marlena Fiol shares an up-close and personal look into one person's journey from fear and anger to compassion. Her book, Nothing Bad Between Us, reveals her deeply personal story about growing up on a leprosy compound in Paraguay, South America, with a father who was both a generous, dedicated healer and a brutal disciplinarian. After escaping to the US, Marlena stumbled from one disaster to another before finding forgiveness and reconciliation. Praised by award-winning writer and filmmaker Phil Cousineau as an epic journey of reconciliation, Nothing Bad Between Us offers an account of a vulnerable and honest struggle on the road to healing. And Cheryl Baker Belul has spent the last 30 years practicing finding the gifts in everyday life. Using disappointment, depression, and anxiety as her teachers, Cheryl has developed products and practices for appreciating the people in our lives and finding creative ways to love, appreciate, and help others. Cheryl is the author of Say It Now, 33 Creative Ways to Say I Love You, which is a book that's right behind her, to the most important people in your life, and founder of Simply Celebrate. So Marlena and Cheryl, welcome.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Annie Blooms. What a wonderful treat to be here. And I feel particularly honored to be helping Marlena celebrate this beautiful, beautiful book launch. Marlena, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know if anyone has yet had a chance to read this amazing book, but I couldn't put it down. I really literally, like, it was just something that page after page, you did a beautiful job. Not only is it a gorgeous memoir, but it's a book that really, it's relevant in so many areas of, I'm just going to say, all of our lives. You know, some themes around courage and resilience and faith and sinfulness and, you know, good and bad and, you know, redemption and relationships. I could go on. But Marlena, why don't you start us off? If you would just give us a high level overview of your book.
Cheryl, thank you so much for that. And thank you, Michael and Annie Blooms, for hosting this event. And thanks to all of you who are here. I've been watching you come in and seeing your names and some of your faces, and it's just so great to see you. When I was thinking about how to prepare for this, I really was a bit at a loss because I've spent a career in public speaking, but it's always been about things that are out there. And tonight is me reflecting with you about very personal things. And I realized that I didn't know how to prepare for it other than to be present and be here with you. And so that's my intention. In terms of an overview, I can say that at one level, the book is a coming of age story about a rebellious, angry young girl who couldn't find her place in the Mennonite community where she grew up on the leprosy compound with a father that was both her hero. He was both my hero, and I rebelled so much against him, and I was so angry toward him because he really was quite cruel in his treatment of me, and even shut me out of his life at one point because of my sinfulness. But really at a deeper level, and this is, I think, the more important part of this story, it's about universal longings for forgiveness, for reconciliation, and even, as Cheryl put it, redemption. I'd say the premise of the book is that when we hit rock bottom, when we are forced to face our worst shame and fears and failings, right there in that brokenness is actually where the possibilities for healing lie. So that's a quick overview. We'll touch on some of those themes some more, I'm sure.
Wow. Wow. Right. And I can't remember if I said this, but I want to be sure to say this, that it's like all of that and it's beautifully written. I'm probably going to say that at least 10 or 12 times in this hour, because from the moment I started reading it, I was just struck by the writing. And so let's start, Marlena, though. You grew up in South America amongst the Mennonites on a leprosy colony. Can you just tell us a tiny bit? I mean, I know I'm hoping everyone's going to read the book, but just give us a taste of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to address first the leprosy issue as an adult looking back, and then say a little bit more about what it felt like as a child. But as an adult, I look back to 1951 when my father and mother founded the leprosy compound. At that time, leprosy was a dreaded disease, and everyone who had the disease was in fact locked up in a colony and very ostracized and separated from families and friends, and just the disease carried so much stigma. And my father insisted, without really knowing how the disease is spread, he insisted that except for the worst, most acute cases, these patients should live with their families. And so he rode out on horseback across the countryside in Paraguay, finding these patients because they would be hiding. They would be so afraid of being locked up. And he would, with an interpreter, because he didn't speak the Guarani language of these people, would gain their trust, and eventually he would get them under treatment and kept them with their families, except for the really, really acute cases, or if the patients had been thrown out of their homes, those came to live with us at the leprosy station. And so it is with huge respect and honor that I think about what my parents did. They were the first to treat patients in their homes. And so they revolutionized how leprosy is treated on the planet today, because that is the way we treat that medical community treats leprosy. As a child, the story is a bit different because I was angry and I was jealous that my parents were called away to do this work that took them away from me, from us. I had 7 brothers and sisters. We spent a lot of time among the leprosy patients, and I did observe how grateful and happy they seemed to be in the midst of all of their suffering, but I didn't let a lot of that in as a child. I mostly was very selfish about, I wanted parents with me, not out there amongst leprosy patients. So that was the child's perspective. My father always said, they are not lepers. Do not ever use the word leper. They are people like you and I who have a disease called leprosy. So, and then, yeah, in that mix, put in the Mennonite, because it was a Mennonite community. My parents were Mennonite, and it was a Mennonite community
I got it on here now.
that ran the leprosy station. And so that adds the whole element of very strict community, a lot of strict rules that I wanted to be a part of, that I was a part of, but that I also rebelled against. So there were a lot of, I was very conflicted. That's all contextual, the leprosy, the Mennonite, but really the story again is a journey from shame to possibility of healing. And that journey continues.
Yeah. Wow. I know there's so much. Your book is so packed with so many places. And I know we talked a little about this before we went live, but I would love to give people just a tiny taste of your writing and to just give them a little bit of an intro. Would you honor us with a bit of a reading?
Sure. I will read a very brief passage. It's the very first page, and then a paragraph at the end of the first chapter. In the dark, squared off pews of the German Mennonite church sanctuary sat my accusers, stern and silent, all eyes converging on me. I dropped my head and concentrated on the rectangular pattern of the tiled floor. The closed church shutters kept out the fiery late afternoon Paraguay sun. The weight of the musty, trapped air was suffocating. Pastor Arnold Entz, a short, balding man with stooped shoulders and a large belly stretching the seams of a black jacket a few sizes too small for him, had ushered me in through a narrow door at the front of the church. We walked beside the choir platform where I stood to sing each Sunday, and behind the organ that I had played for 7 years since I was 11. A single straight-backed wooden chair had been placed next to the pulpit. The pastor signaled for me to sit. I made my way to the chair without looking up. I had dressed judiciously for this meeting. My dark gray skirt hung well below my knees. My arms itched against the starched long sleeves of my white shirt, buttoned neck high. I had pulled my long, wild, reddish brown hair into a tight bun at the nape of my neck. I wore no makeup. Pastor Entz addressed the rows and rows of pews in High German. Although Mennonites in Paraguay all spoke the guttural, mostly unwritten Plotdeutsch, which is Low German, to one another, in church we spoke only the more dignified High German, which was a distinctly different language. For example, church excommunication in Plotdeutsch is Teutsgebon, while in High German it's Kirchenverbot. We have called this special meeting on this first Sunday in January to discuss your sins and to determine the consequences, Pastor Entz said, turning to me. Heavy silence. I swallowed hard to keep acid from rising in my throat. And the chapter ends with, I heard nothing further. They had just taken away from me all that I held most dear about the Mennonite church. I loved the music, but it wasn't just that. I had been a soloist in the choir, and the church leaders consistently had shown such appreciation for my organ playing. How was I supposed to face these people now? I imagined the word unclean stamped in red letters on my forehead. The prayer finally ended and people rose to leave. I watched my father's rigid back as he strode out and disappeared.
Wow, right? I don't know if you still feel that, but
Of course, yes, yes.
yeah. You know, that, like you said, that is the opening, right? And I really wanted you to read that because to me, I think once people hear that, you know, you just want to go get the book and keep on reading.
It does set up the conflicts that existed between, well, within myself, certainly between myself and my father and between the Mennonite community and me.
Yeah. And if it's okay, Marlena, I'm just going to jump right into what I found to be one of the most compelling parts of your book, which is, I mean, this is a memoir. That's not a made up story of that moment. And that's one of many, many moments in this book, beautifully written, that are challenging beyond, at least for me, challenging beyond belief, hard times that you went through, you know, and there was loneliness, there was hunger, there was beatings, there was, you know, this idea of what you went through in the church. And I just want to start there because it's so central, this idea of that darkness, the challenging times you went through. Tell us what that is for you and where all of that led you.
Thanks for that question. I think it is an important one. And we all hate the dark times. Nobody likes to suffer. We don't like pain. And yet I think many of you may agree with me that when you look back on your life to the times when you did go through pain and difficult times, sometimes those are the times when we have learned the biggest lessons. They've been gifts for us, those times, when we look at them in retrospect. I describe a lot of hard knocks, but in retrospect, definitely, I will say that they gave me a lot that is very good. For one thing, a pretty healthy dose of humility. It's an amazing thing how when you are stuck in your own stuff and your own failings, how that can actually help us to show up with more compassion around other people's struggles. It also taught me resilience, getting up off the floor in the hardest times. And I know you understand this, Sherry, because you've had those difficult times in your own life. But it allows us to really get it, that we have strengths we don't even know we had, and we can draw on aspects of ourselves we didn't know about. And so that's a wonderful thing. But I will say that the huge challenge for me then and now is how to grasp what those gifts are in the moment. It's all well and good to say, well, in retrospect, here are the things I learned. I now see that I'm out of the dark times and I can see what they did for me. My struggle is with wanting to learn to do that in the moment, to understand in the moment what the gift is that I should be receiving when I'm in dark times that will continue. I mean, this is, we all will have those times in the future. The word gift in German means poison. And I think that for many of us, that's what the gift is in hard times. It feels like poison. And my desire is that I would learn to accept the gifts in the moment when I'm going through the difficult times, and that's a challenge.
Wow. I'm just reminded there is a part in your book where you literally are drinking what is poison to cure something, right?
Okay, yeah.
Obviously, I'm not the only one probably right here in this room thinking we are in the middle of a very challenging time. For some people, deep grief and loss, but for everyone, I think there's some level of challenge. And I think this is the perfect time to just bring that in and to talk about that. So when you talked about, Marlena, how do I use this in the moment? Are you able to, do you find that having gone through all of this, it brings you to a different way of dealing with what we're going through right now?
I'd love to say that I've figured it all out and I've got it all together and I can see all the gifts that are given to us in these dark times. And no, I struggle with it. I think many of us do. And yeah, these are very difficult times for people who've lost loved ones, who've lost jobs, who, my daughter and her family are on listening to this, and she and her husband are working full-time jobs with young kids who are in school at home. And this is the case for so many people around the world. What I hear so often is, I'm just hanging on until the world will be normal again, or this too shall pass. And my hope is that I can, certainly speaking for myself, rather than hanging on until it's normal or this too shall pass, to really accept, what is it that I need to learn right here? What is it what's the gift in this difficult time? And so I think it's a real challenge for all of us. And especially those who really are struggling so much more than Ed, my husband, and I. We're really among the fortunate that we haven't suffered huge losses. But yeah, I do believe that the challenge is for all of us to ask, what am I supposed to learn here? And what is the gift? What's the lesson?
Yeah, thank you. That is beautiful. And I just have to say, from my own personal experience of reading your book, I felt as if I were right there, right? I think that was the immediacy of your writing. And so oftentimes what happened for me was actually, and it's going to sound a little weird, but I actually felt like I was going through a little bit of a training of how to be more resilient. Because there were certain things where I would stop and just really try to imagine, because I knew you from, we've met before, and I would think, this is real. This is not a made up story. And there were times in the book, many times actually, where you would find joy in the midst of all of the really difficult places you were in. Do you want to speak to any of that piece for that young girl who was able to do that?
Well, it's kind of you to say. I feel like I lost a lot of opportunities to find joy. There's a fair amount of regret today that I couldn't find more joy. I remember sitting on the ground next to Ramona, who was one of our very first leprosy patients who came to us. She was blind. Her nose was caved in. Her fingers had been reabsorbed, so she had no fingers, and she was sitting on the ground and I was sitting next to her, and she was telling me how grateful she was for life and how grateful she was to be there. And I wanted to experience her joy. I will say that. I wanted joy, but there were many, many moments when I could have experienced joy and I didn't. And that's the truth.
Well, and that's making me think. I'm going to jump, because I told you I was going to do this. Like, I'm so much wanting to talk about the big topics, these human themes, but I also want to talk about you as a writer. And so I'm going to jump. This seems like a good point, because one of the things that fascinated me was the level of detail. And the reason I'm connecting this is because you told me that there was one way that you really found to get love and to feel that joy and love. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So, because when I asked you, I said, how did you remember all these details?
Okay, so Sherry's referring to, I'll make this brief. She's referring to a scene in the book where I began to attend a Spanish Catholic high school. And believe it or not, up until high school, I didn't know Spanish, even though I lived in Paraguay, because Mennonites tend to live in fairly closed communities, and it was Low German was my first language, and then High German in school, and I didn't know Spanish. And so I attended a Spanish high school, and the first year, in order to get good grades, I basically felt like I had to memorize texts so that I could spit it back out on the exam. And the teacher, the directora and the teacher brought me into the office and accused me of cheating because I had written out in the exam exactly what was in the textbook. And then I let them know that I started reciting it for them. And so Sherry asked me earlier in the week when we were talking, so do you have a photographic memory? And I said, absolutely not. I worked really, really hard at it. And the sad part of that is that I did it because I felt I had to do that to be loved. I mean, I got so much attention from my teachers, and I craved that. And so it's actually a very sad statement. Yeah.
Sad. And yet I'm going to go ahead and, project again, that I look at that girl and I think, wow, she was so smart, right? That you, right? I'm not a character, but it's like that you could do that. I am in awe of, right? That you were able to do that. And the reason I connected it to the writing of the book is because, and I think this would be great for you to address, I'm sure if other people have read it or they're going to, they'll want to know the same thing. I asked you, how did you remember so many details. The book is just alive, and vibrant with life and detail. And so that's why I'd asked you if you had a photographic memory.
There are a number of my colleagues here tonight on this Zoom call, and they know that in the business world that I came from, that for 40 years, I wrote scholarly articles and books where we had to tell, not show. And then 5 years ago, after I retired from my business, being a consultant and business scholar, I started journaling and writing more fiction and nonfiction literary work. And it was all about show, don't tell, show the scene, don't tell. Well, my teacher, Lisa Olin Harris, is on the Zoom tonight, and she knows that I struggle a lot with that. Ed and I are writing a novel right now, in fact, about my parents, John and Clara Schmidt. And getting the details and getting the scenes right is very, very difficult. I have to say, though, that in writing the memoir, it was a very different experience. I felt like I would go into a scene and I was in it, and I could smell that musty church, and I could feel the heat, and I could feel my sense of feeling suffocated. And it was really not hard for me, not nearly as hard, Lisa, as it is for Ed and me to do this in speaking about someone else, not myself. I'm putting myself in my parents' shoes, and that's very different. So yeah, it was being in the scene, and then it kind of poured out because I was there.
Do you remember what else you told me when we were talking about this earlier in the week?
No.
You told me I could say anything, so I'm going to say this.
I did tell you you could say anything.
You mentioned the word calling.
Oh.
And I loved that because that happens to be a word that you use in the book a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic I used that word when we were speaking, because my parents had a calling, and they always talked about being called to do the work that they're doing. In all of the 40 years that I was in the business world, and I had a very fulfilling career. I loved what I did. Mm-hmm. I never felt called, ever. And there is a piece of me right now with the writing that I'm doing that feels more like being called than doing it for any other reason. It's more about being than about doing, if that makes sense. And I don't know, my parents are gone. I don't know what they would say about that. And it would be pretty interesting to have that conversation with them, because it's ironic that I would use the word called when that was their word for their mission work.
Yeah, and this about me, I'm a little bit woo-woo, so I'm just gonna say, but it's like, I know you're at the very beginning of this journey with this book, and this is gonna bring us back. I want to talk about another theme that I feel is really important, and it's connected to my sense of you being called to do this, which is there's some really incredibly healing topics about this book. And, Lord knows, there's a lot of places, between one-on-one in relationships and, divisiveness amongst large groups of people. And so I'm going to bring us back to one of my favorite themes in the book, which is this theme of showing up with love. And that scene that you read at the beginning, where your father walks out the door, I love that you started with that, because it seemed to me like place after place in the book where either you or your father or your mother, your family, you walk back in the door to each other. You come back, mm-hmm. and you come back with love.
Yeah.
Will you tell us more about all of that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Sherry, because it really, the whole, that coming back and being present and the forgiveness is really the underlying theme of the book. people who've read the book have sometimes come to me and have said, you know, your father and you never asked forgiveness. You never said, forgive me to each other. And I think it is a story of forgiveness, and it is true. Nowhere in the book do we say, I am sorry, please forgive me. No, at no time in our lives did we say, I am sorry, please forgive me. And so you might ask, well, how can this be a story about forgiveness? For me, forgiveness is too often sort of talked about in terms of debt, using the language of debt. So if I harm you, Sherry, then I am indebted to you. And so I owe you I owe you I owe you an apology because there's debt, right? And it sort of takes us down, takes all of the relationships into the level of transaction. And it gets even into power plays sometimes. And I've experienced this in my own life where it's, well, what's owed and who's owed more? Do I owe more or do you owe more? Who has a bigger debt here? And it can be almost a power play. And I think that I prefer to think about forgiveness as that compassion that acknowledges the woundedness, the hurt and the pain within all of us. And when my father and I showed up for each other in open ways and in vulnerable ways, that's when compassion really allowed us, compassion started to flow between us and allowed us to have forgiveness without ever forgiving each other. I think from that perspective, forgiveness as compassion rather than forgiveness as words, it's not anything I do or say, it's something that I then step into rather than saying it. And we stepped into it. Yes, we had to open ourselves. There was something we had to bring to the party, but we stepped into it rather than doing or saying it, which I think sometimes trivializes the huge thing that forgiveness is when we put it at the level of the language of debt and of the words, please forgive me, I think it's trivialized. And if we think about love in the same way, and this gets to, I want you to say a bit about your book, about ways to say, I love you. But think about those words, I love you. And my husband, Ed, and I say, I love you multiple times a day to each other. And that's great. But the really shivery, spiritual love moments between us, and I know, Ed, I'm speaking for both of us here, they happen not when we say, I love you, they happen when we show up with all of our emotionally naked, with all of our woundedness, show up for each other. That's when the wow happens. And again, I think we trivialize these important things in our lives when we think about them in terms of language and the words we say. Does that make sense?
Marlena, oh, more than makes sense. I mean, it gives me chills what you're saying to me, and you know, thank you for bringing in, you know, my work and my book, because this was a place. I think the reason that those moments, they were like neon for me, you know, when suddenly, like in an unexpected, like I would have never thought your father would show up that way, or you would show up that way, and you did. And I think it did bring me to what is so meaningful to me, which is showing up is love. When you show up, just like you said it so beautifully, I'm not even going to try to do that again, but it's like that it goes way beyond words. We're talking about, like you said, showing up. And it's another question that I had for you that I think fits in right here, which is, how do we keep our hearts open to do that, to show up with love in the way that both you and your father, I'll just focus on you two for the minute, time and again did for each other without words?
Well, it was a gradual journey. I mean, it didn't happen in a big whoosh, and it didn't happen for numerous decades. It was very gradual, but the culminating moment I described in the last chapter of the book. I was 37, and I'll just briefly describe this scene because it's kind of shows the bookends of my father walking out of the church when I was 18, and now I'm 37. And my parents are about to celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary. And my father asked me to be the MC. We have shown up for each other quite a bit by then. This has gradually been an opening up. And it happened also because it was we got beaten up quite a bit in life. I had was reeling from an abusive second marriage, and my father was reeling from brain surgery and feeling useless after leaving the leprosy work. And this brokenness really helped us shed some of so when you say, how did we stay open? Some of it was forced on us by being broken down and seeing each other broken down. And so that it sort of broke that shield we had that was not allowing us to have open hearts. But in that moment, when he asked me to be the MC for their wedding anniversary, what this meant was that I would again be in front of a Mennonite congregation. And some of the people in that congregation would be the same people who had banned me from participating in church activities when I was 18 and stood in front of them with my shame. And I resisted the idea and said no for quite a while, and then finally agreed to do it. And that was a pivotal moment because I stood there in front of my former accusers, and I think that's when I got the first really important glimpses that vulnerability is a strength. I'm going to be vulnerable and myself and stand in this place, and it's going to be a place of strength. And that really was a big learning moment for me. And then right after that was we went to my parents' house after the celebration, and there was a lot of commotion. My brothers and sisters were all there, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and my father and I sat off to the side, and I looked him in the eye and took his hand in mine, and I said in our native Low German, in our Plotich, I said, "Du hast nichts zwischen uns." And what that means is there's nothing bad between us. And of course, that's the title of the book. And he looked at me and he said, "Nee, du hast nichts zwischen uns." And from then on, for the next 20 years of his life, those were the last words we said to each other at every goodbye. And they were the last words we said before he died in 2003. So that it was a long journey. It was a bumpy journey. And yes, it was opening our hearts in a way that said yes. And my forwardist said this so well, actually. Phil Cousineau wrote the foreword for the book. And he said it so well. I'll paraphrase rather than trying to read it. But he said that the phrase, "Das nichts zwischen uns," there's nothing bad between us, implies, yes, there was something bad. There was something really bad, but it's no longer between us. And I loved that he wrote that. That's one of my favorite parts of that foreword, because I never really put that together well. We didn't beat each other up ever about what we did to each other. And we did some pretty awful things. He did some pretty awful things to me when I was young. And there was never any confrontation about it, but that statement, that refrain, there's nothing bad between us, it acknowledged there's some really bad stuff, and it no longer is. And that's true forgiveness, I think.
Oh, Marlena.
Yeah.
Do you know, I don't know how to say this word. I think it's kintsugi, the Japanese art where they mend broken pottery with gold.
With gold, yes.
That was the image that came to me when
Yes.
I finished your book, was that, you know, yes, it was broken, and yet now there's this beautiful gold.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Japanese artwork, they break pottery. They actually break the pottery, and then the artist takes gold and fills in and repairs it with gold in the cracks, so that the cracks are actually emphasized. And it's exactly right. It's the cracks, it's the brokenness that can bring us to real beauty. Yeah.
Well, I feel like that's what your book gave me, right? Was that it's that twist of looking at it. Like I saw the mending. And yes, the brokenness is there as well, but you see the mending. And you and I talked a little bit about this earlier in the week, that I think it's an important thing, again, to like bring this out. This isn't just about your personal story. We're in a moment of time where there's a lot of mending to be done. And I just thought, you know, if you have a few words to say about that, I would love to hear.
Oh, absolutely. My journey has been one of personal healing, and it's a journey that will continue until the day I die. I think some of these things are important for our collective healing. And in our country right now, oh my gosh, do we ever need collective healing? And no matter what political party we favor, it seems that our responsibility is to show up with compassion and look at the brokenness within ourselves and our political party, and look at the brokenness over there. And in that space, healing can occur. And so, yeah, I think that the same is true at the collective level. My focus has been very much on my personal journey, but I think there are lessons for us collectively.
Yeah, and I really appreciate, you've used the word vulnerable a few times. You've used the word broken a few times. And, you know, in that sense of how do we show up, which is one of the most beautiful parts, again, of your book. There's so many things, but how do we allow ourselves to show up in that we're all broken, right? Like in some ways, and how do we show up with that? How are we vulnerable with that? And then how does that connect us?
Yeah. No, that's great. I love the way you put that. And I sometimes feel like vulnerability is an antidote to shame. So when I was publicly humiliated and shamed when I was a young girl in front of this whole big Mennonite congregation. And I carried that shame with me for a long time. And that shame led me to some really bad decisions that I made in my life, really destructive patterns. But I think that it was, you know, secrecy and the silence and the judgment, they all just allow the shame to just continue creating all the damage. I see vulnerability as the opening. If shame is the closing down because we're humiliated, vulnerability is opening it and exposing, even though it's really scary. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. Any of you who know about the Enneagram, well, 8s hate vulnerability more than just about anything else, because the biggest fear of an 8 is to be violated, to expose myself and be violated by others. And so it's hard, it's really difficult, but I also know that the healing, it's part of the healing path. And I actually want to read an email that I got this morning which says something to me about the power of this healing path. Maybe also for others. This person says to me in the email this morning, you really put yourself out there. That takes real courage, and I commend your honesty. The story would have much less power without this level of risk. So you have done the world a service, because many of us have hidden stories we should really share with others. We all need a new level of honesty in our world, since it seems to be rapidly disappearing. And it's these kinds of messages that make me believe that this is important for my healing path, but it also may be inspiring for some other people out there. So.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And it takes me back to the idea that, you know, you being called to do this, you being the way that the book flowed out of you, the way that these beautiful themes and, you know, that we can all relate to, even though it's your story, right? In the personal is the universal. And I just realized, I glanced up at the time. I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but I don't want to hog you. And I just wanted to open it up to see if anyone had any questions. And then we can circle back and have you kind of end our circle. But if anybody has any questions, I guess the best thing probably, Michael, is if they want to put them in the chat.
Sure, you're welcome to. You can also hop onto the screen. I think that would probably be fine if you're
It'd be great. I'd love
adventurous.
people to hop on the screen.
Whatever you want to do.
Oh, I see Rachel. Yeah, there you go.
Hi, congratulations, Marlena. I am so happy for you and your release of this beautiful book.
Thank you.
So just listening to all this, I haven't read it yet, and I will say yet because I plan to read it. And just what you wrote in the opening, how was it for you going back? I mean, because I know in the writing process, especially when it's so personal, the going back can be a whole different kind of healing process when you see things that you didn't even know you saw, you know, because it comes up in the writing. So did you have any moments like that where when you went back, you actually processed some of the stuff a little differently?
Yeah, I started writing this stuff actually as journaling. So it was my own journaling, which then I took some of the journals and published them as essays. And during those early versions of journaling and publishing the essays, a lot of stuff came up, a lot of anger, a lot of pain, not just around the church experience, but some of the other issues in my life. But by the time I got to writing this book, I have to say that I felt just enormous compassion for myself in those places, but also for my accusers. I understood them and I could feel compassion for them. So by the time I wrote the book, a lot of this stuff had come up and out. Yeah. Thanks for your question.
Well, I'll hop in. Marlena, Sherry, so many people. Great to see you all. Yeah, so in the process, I know you talked about the process of writing the book and how that has kind of helped you with transforming and healing. But especially right now, you know, with the kind of divisive things, are there other tools that maybe, you know, through your journey, especially the transformation with your father, that you hold now, that you carry out into the world that you might share with us that might be helpful beyond writing, which is its own, you know, alchemical magic thing? But I just have a feeling you might have another trick up your sleeve or two that you could share with us right now.
Thanks, Nita, for that question. I don't know that I have a trick up my sleeve, but I will say that for Ed and me during this time, our Tai Chi practice has been really, really important. It is a moving meditation. It's a way of centering ourselves. And I would say that's the most important thing for us during this time that's kept us centered. Yeah. And there's always snuggling. I mean, that's probably at the top of the list. And you have your Ed too. And yeah, yeah. Thanks for the question, Nita.
I have a question.
Hey, Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Hello. Hi, Marlena. It's lovely to see you guys again. I have a question, you know, in terms of how what you've experienced could help us now with what we're going through in this country. I think one of the hardest parts of forgiveness is letting go of the bad. And you were able to do that. So how did you get to that point where you could really, truly let go of the bad? Because you can say you forgive somebody, but you're still carrying that with you. So how did you let go of the hurt? Can you help us know how to do that better ourselves?
What a fabulous question. Why would I think you would ask anything other than a fabulous question, Linda? You know, I struggle with that in my life right now with people that I have forgiven and I still hang on to stuff. And so I'm not sure I have huge words of wisdom, except to say that I will say again, in the case of my father and me, that it was a slow process of really seeing each other's brokenness. And it sounds like it's a broken record, but it is that those broken places, he saw it in me. He saw me crumble after a second marriage. And I had made such bad choices in my life. And he witnessed that. And I witnessed his pain and his suffering, this guy who was so invincible. That brought compassion into the space. And so it wasn't, I can honestly say that the awful stuff dissipated in that case. And can this always work? I don't know. I certainly struggle with the question the exact question you're asking. I struggle with it today. But I know that in the case of my father and me, it dissipated. That energy, that negativity, literally it dissipated. We didn't have to push it away. Once we saw each other in real and emotionally naked ways, it dissipated. And can we get there? Can I get there with other relationships that are difficult? That's the real challenging question. And you're dead on with the question.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful.
We have a question in the chat from Liz Heaney. Can you say more about your spiritual journey, beginning as a Mennonite, continuing to where you are now?
Absolutely. What a great question. I'm not a practicing Mennonite right now, but I will say that there is very, very, very much about me that is still very Mennonite. I still think that sitting in a circle of Mennonites and singing 4-part harmony is just about the most fabulous thing for me. But the journey from when I was banned from participating in my childhood church was, first of all, complete rebellion and complete sort of dissociation and moving away from it. And then gradually coming to understand that that is a path to God, and there are other paths to God. And through both the Unitarian Universalist Church and then the Unity Church, I became very much a desiring to follow Christ's path and other teachers, Buddhist path, and understanding that spirituality can come in many different forms and paths to God are in many different forms. But I certainly have come back quite a ways back around to where I came from. And isn't that often the case? We come back to where we started and we see it all in a new and different way. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Do we have any others? We're right about at 8 o'clock, but
I have a quick question.
yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Marlena. I haven't completely finished reading your book yet, and we've talked a lot about these kind of things. I'm a fellow missionary kid, as you know. And a big difference between your experience and mine, I think, is but maybe not, is that I grew up where I couldn't fit into the country that I was growing up in, which was Japan. And but I can identify with the feeling ostracized and being othered, and not having other families like mine around me. And it seems to me you had so many layers of otherness, including your cultural identity. So as a German American growing up in Paraguay, Mennonite, and then being ostracized from the Mennonites. And you've already been asked, what is your spiritual identity? I'm wondering, how do you identify culturally? What is your cultural identity?
Wow, big question. And it's 8 o'clock, so I'm going to give a really short answer to a great, great question. I have a confused identity. I'm not really home anywhere, even though I can fit pretty easily in different contexts. But it also, I think, leads me to be maybe a little more adaptable than would otherwise be the case. So there are pluses and minuses. But yeah, confused. I think that's the good bottom line. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Marlena, before we all have to go, I just wanted to know, like, if you could leave us with one message, like right here in this moment of time, as we're all like celebrating you and celebrating this book, and like, what would you like us to take away?
Oh, well, tomorrow's World Kindness Day. And the word kind is associated with, etymologically, it's associated with the word kin or kinship, which recognizes that we are all connected. And so we can say with compassion, "Du hast nichts zwischen uns."
That was so beautiful.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you so much. And Michael and Annie Blooms, thank you for hosting this. And all of you, with all of the Zoom work and Zoom studies and Zoom everything that you're on here tonight, thank you so much. And please remember Annie Blooms and other indie bookstores when you're buying gifts this holiday season. Let's support our independent bookstores. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a great reading, and thanks for plugging indie bookstores. And thank you everyone for coming out tonight. This has been recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow afternoon if you want to share it with others. I'll put the link in that link that I just shared there. I'll put the YouTube link in there sometime tomorrow afternoon, so you can check there for it. And yeah, thanks again to everyone. Have a very good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.